when you create a new sequence, Premiere Pro allows you to specify in advance how many audio and video tracks that sequence is going to have. Now, this isn't particularly important if you're making a one-off sequence and you're just going to get to work on it, because you can always go in and add and remove any amount of tracks that you like whenever you want. The only thing you can't change is the mastering format. Here we've got the audio master, and you can set this to either be mono, stereo, 5.1, or multi-channel. In fact, if you choose multi-channel, you can choose up to 16 channels of audio output. This is the only setting you cannot change for the audio management, if you like, of a sequence once it's been made. If you did want to change this, you would have to create a new sequence and then copy and paste all of your content from one to the other. That's actually very easy to do. You can just press Control A on a PC or Command A on a Mac. That's going to select everything, and then use Control or Command C to copy. Go to the other sequence and choose Control or Command V to paste. These are standard keyboard shortcuts everywhere, and it works absolutely fine, but you might want to check if the conforming is correct and so on. Anyway, here I've got the option for what I'm mastering to, and it's important because each of my audio tracks inside my sequence, they're all going to have to somehow send audio to my master output. Like all of the other settings in the new sequence panels, the master option is the settings the file would have. If you turned your sequence into a file, how would it be? What would the frame size be? What would the frame rate be? And what kind of audio would it have? The master option is therefore extremely important. Now, we can specify how many video tracks there are. That's pretty straightforward. Anytime you see orange numbers with an underline in an Adobe application, you can either click and drag, and you go up to 99 video tracks, or you can click and just type. Here I can specify, and what I'm going to do just to show you this dialog box is I'm going to show you multi-channel. So I want to show you just briefly a new type of audio track that's been added to this version. Then here we've got the audio tracks that are there by default. I can click and add more and more and more and more if I want. And now, bearing in mind that I can add or remove any amount of audio tracks later if I like very quickly, I've got simple options for changing which track is which. I can move these up and down on the list. Not much point there because they're all the same. I can rename these tracks. I can select them and delete multiple tracks. And then I can choose the type of track that I want. I won't go into too much detail just yet about this, but notice that I can make submixes, which are just the same as you would have on a mixing desk. I can choose to have a mono track, a standard track, a 5.1, or an adaptive track. Standard tracks are a new type of track that allows you to put both mono and stereo media on the same track. Up to version 5.5, you could only put mono on a mono track and stereo on a stereo track. Now these tracks will automatically adapt, and you can have one or the other on them. So standard is effectively replacing the stereo track type. And then we've got some really interesting new options here. If I choose adaptive, I've got a map option which allows me to specify based on the original input audio. What's described as input here is, if you like, the audio in my original clip, where that's going to go for output. Remember, we're looking at up to 16 channels because I set my master to be 16 channels. So I can specify by using this menu, okay, if my source audio is channel 1, where do I want that audio to go for output? I might have that go to number 1 and number 6, or maybe just to number 6. And now I've got 2 original source audios going to number 6. You have to be a bit careful with this. I'll just reset here because Premiere Pro will let you do it wrong. So if you, for example, have 8 channels of audio on your original master tape and you set them all to output to channel 1 in your master, well, that's exactly where it's going to go. Premiere Pro is quite happy to let you mix all of your audio down to a mono channel if that's what you want to do, because for some people that's what has to happen, particularly, for example, news editors who might need to output everything as mono. So that's the output channel mapping. And then here we've got a pre, pan, or balance control, depending on whether you're working on dual mono or properly original stereo audio. It's kind of the same thing. But here I can specify in advance to have my audio 1 track panned or balanced left or panned right. If you're used to editing with an application like Avid Media Composer, for example, it would be panned left and right like this all the way through. Now, all this is doing is setting the pan control in the audio mixer for each track in advance. I can easily go in later and do this. So it's a lot of clicks if I'm just creating a sequence now. I can always do it later. And equally, I've got this option to pre-open the track. And that means I want Premiere Pro to be displaying the waveform, to be displaying the rubber band controls for these tracks so I can make adjustments to them over time. Turning this on just really saves you one click because you can expand the audio for a track anyway by clicking on a little expansion triangle. So I'm hoping you're wondering why we've got all these options. And the reason we've got them is because of this Save Preset button. I can use all of these controls and the individual settings controls based on an original sequence preset to create exactly the number of tracks that I want with exactly the mapping and the panning and the ones that I want to be displaying their waveform or not. All of these controls can be predefined by me and saved into an amazing preset. And I might say this is exactly the settings I need for all of my edits. Now, you may laugh, but in fact, many broadcasters work exactly this way. They strip out all of the other presets and just have one preset setting for a sequence, which could be called something as simple as use this one. And it avoids any confusion during the edit because everything is set up perfectly. So that's the tracks controls for new sequences made in Premiere Pro CS6. Just remember, the only thing you can't change later is the mastering. What are you going to master to? Are you producing a stereo, 5.1 mono, or a multi-channel output from your sequence?